Players of all ratings watch our content, and sometimes that makes it hard to give actionable tips that apply to everybody. So today I want to cover one top lane tip for each rank. That way I can cover something that anyone out there can apply to their gameplay to help them improve. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. I'm putting out tons of additional content out there for all different roles and champions. So if that's something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. Now I'm going to group Iron and Bronze together simply because these two ratings have very similar issues that need to be addressed. This is the fact that most top laners in these elos don't CS properly. The lane will be played in very erratic patterns where they'll be playing aggressive for one wave, and then they'll play safe, and then they'll play completely at their tower, and then they'll sometimes walk into the jungle. You want to spend as much time in these elos in your lane getting CS and hitting the tower. You want to get as much gold as possible in these elos and dump them into stats that give you survivability and damage. For this reason, typically bruisers like Garen and Darius are going to be really strong in this elo because they can push towers down faster with their empowered autos. They clear minions very easily. You don't have to worry about mana all too much on these champions. You do a little bit on Darius, but Garen is manaless, and they are strong fighters that don't have a problem taking a 1v2. Typically in this elo, you really want to avoid mechanical intensive champions like Irelia, Riven, or Yasuo because they're just going to be too demanding for you to play. It's much better to just focus on getting your CS and your towers down. That way you can get the amount of gold that you should have, which will allow you to carry the game, even if you don't have great mechanics. It's very important that you learn the core gameplay that makes League itself before you try to tackle the mechanical aspect of the game. This means you want to be farming whenever you possibly can. You want to be going back to the base when you need more HP. You want to be using teleport if you take teleport to get back to your lane. You want to make sure that you're spending as much time as possible in the lane, hitting minions and actually farming those minions so you get the gold from them, so that you can then fight the enemy champions whenever you need to. As long as you can establish a golden EXP income, you'll be off to a pretty good start, even if you play mechanically horrendously and you have no idea what wave management is. The best way to learn how to CS properly is just by going into a practice tool with whatever champion you want to play and play for the first 10 minutes of the game and try to hit 70 to 80 CS. And you just practice that over and over again. If you do this once or twice every single day before you go into ranked, then you'll definitely see a huge improvement in the amount of minions you're actually able to CS and the amount of gold you're able to attain during the game. All right, next up is silver. And in this elo, it is very important that you start to learn wave management. If you never make an effort to understand wave management, then you will never be able to climb past diamond. Wave management is something that takes a ton of experience and knowledge to completely master, but you don't need to master it in this elo. We just want to start understanding wave management and practicing using it. You wouldn't believe the amount of times that I've played against a diamond Yasuo or Irelia one trick that just has absolutely no concept of wave management. They don't know how to freeze. All they ever do is push, and then they die 10 to 20 times in a game, and they don't understand why they died. They say, oh, Irelia is so weak. No, Irelia is not weak. You don't know how to play the lane phase. You want to start learning wave management. This means knowing what freezes are, knowing what slow pushing is, what a neutral lane is, what every single lane looks like, so you know if you're being frozen on and if you need help pushing that out. You need to know when you want to initiate these and what they're going to do for you. All of these things about wave management are going to be very important. A very simple guide is a neutral lane is a lane where neither lane is pushing. There are an equal amount of minions. A frozen lane is a lane where the enemy wave has 3 more minions than your wave has, and that is going to allow you to hold the wave outside of your tower, and that will stay frozen there forever. So long as you always leave 3 minions alive in the enemy wave, that will stay frozen. If you hit the wave too much, it will unfreeze because minions will die and you'll no longer have 3 extra minions in the enemy wave. So you want to make sure that you follow that rule, 3 extra minions at all times if you're holding a freeze. Now what a freeze does for you is it will allow you to hold the minions just outside your tower, which makes it very, very safe for you to stay in that lane. It also makes it a lot more dangerous for the enemy to stay in that lane because they're more susceptible to a gank. When freezing, you can also deny the enemy laner golden EXP by walking a little bit further up and making it so that they can't walk into the minion wave in order to farm it. Slow pushing is the opposite of freezing, where you have 3 additional minions in your wave rather than the enemy wave, and you use this to create larger waves to crash into the enemy tower, which will allow you to miss less minions when you base and come back to a fuller wave. If this is your first time hearing about wave management, then I definitely recommend that you check out one of our full wave management guides on the channel. Next up, we've got gold elo. And my biggest tip for players who are trying to improve in gold is to not focus on mechanical stuff like Irelia, Yasuo, Riven, because these champions are just not great for this elo. Now they are great for climbing and winning in this elo, but they're not great for actually improving at the game. That is to say that if you play enough on these champions and you master them, you will be able to win games because you're just going to be able to win lane, you're going to snowball out of control, and then that will allow you to take over the game. However, this will not allow you to learn very important lane mechanics that apply to every other champion in the game. The main issues with these champions is they're just overtuned and rely on mechanics, and if you can mechanically play them, then you're going to see a lot of success on them. They don't really have to pay attention to wave management, they don't have normal power curves compared to other champions, and on top of it, they don't really reward healthy play or smart play. You're allowed to play much more aggressive on these champions than other champions because their windows of opportunity are so low, so this is an entirely new concept that you just don't need to learn if you play these champions. This does not mean that you don't have to learn different things in order to play these champions. You definitely do. You need to know how to play around minions for the most part and cooldowns for the most part with these champions. And if you play that perfectly, or you play it well, or you considerably improve at these things, then you're going to climb with those champions. The problem is those don't apply to other things. So if you ever get to the point where you suddenly want to stop playing Irelia, or you want to stop one-tricking any of these champions or champions like them, it becomes very, very, very hard for you to play any other champion. You can definitely have them as a pocket pick, and that's completely fine, but I would not recommend maining the champion. Stuff like Garen, Aatrox, Darius, Tryndamere, Renekton, all this stuff is going to allow you to learn the game much better. Now, if you're not a player that just wants to play those champions, then I have a different tip, and that's to focus on base timings and warding. What I mean by this is you want to be, first of all, managing the wave properly so that you have a very good base timer and you lose as little as possible, but you also want to be basing when you can actually buy meaningful, impactful items. It's not always something that you'll be able to do, but if you can start looking at it and plan on basing when you have 1,300 gold, for example, when you want to buy a phage, then this is going to establish healthy habits, which will then allow you to pick up other champions much quicker. It will also allow you to establish some consistency in your play, which is very important to start establishing. You don't need to be the most consistent player in the game when you're gold, but you do want to start being at least somewhat consistent. This means that when you look at your games from game to game, you're having a relatively similar amount of CS, you're building similar items for similar scenarios, and playing similar champions for similar reasons. All of your games should just start to make sense as to why you did the things that you did, and when you look back at them, you shouldn't be confused and be like, wait, why did I play this champion? Why did I build this item? Why did I only have this much CS? You want to start developing that consistency now, because it is something that if you want to climb into the highest tier of play, you're going to have to be very consistent. All right, now moving into platinum, now is when I would highly recommend people start focusing on their mechanics. If you've started working on your consistency and wave management, then these things should be not quite second nature to you, but they should be fairly easy. You shouldn't be focusing on them for the entire game, and they should feel a little bit more natural to you. At this point, you're going to start playing against players that are more mechanically superior, which means they're going to start challenging you mechanically a lot more often. This allows you to have consistency in your practice, which is very, very important if you want to develop something quickly. This is why I never recommend that a player below platinum ever focuses on their mechanics as a way to climb. You're simply not going to be playing against players who are mechanically good enough at those elos to consistently challenge you and allow you to improve your mechanics as well. It's much better to focus on other things that you can consistently control and work on in every single game in those elos. But once you get around to plat, players are mechanically skilled enough normally that they will start to challenge you, which means that you can start practicing your mechanics and developing those to get you to a diamond level. In order to get to diamond, it's best if you do so off of a mixture of mechanics and game knowledge as a top laner. Yes, there are players who can just climb strictly off of mechanics. If you're an Aurelia or Riven One Trick, you don't need to learn how to play the game. You can just play the game mechanically well and do everything wrong, but your champion is good enough and you play the champion well enough mechanically that you still win. This is not what we're hoping for, but it can happen. At this point, the best way to get better at the game mechanically is just to play a ton of games. So I would highly recommend, if you're struggling in Platinum, just play as much as you can and focus on your mechanics. Focus on dodging skill shots, using any animation cancels properly, all of these things until you can do them second nature just off of your reflexes. A lot of the time, there's a huge speed bump in this elo because up until this point, people are used to going out, researching, learning about the game in order to help them improve, and that sees a lot of success for them. But at this point, you just need to be able to play the game at a baseline mechanical level. So the best way to get there is just to practice. All right, diamond level is a little bit harder to talk about because every diamond player is lacking something different. There are so many ways to specialize in this game that you can get to diamond doing so many different things, especially as a top laner. You could be a tank player, you could play Shen and play for your team, you could be a Riven and Aurelia One Trick and just play for mechanics, you could be a Tryndamere main and just split push all day, right? There are so many different ways that you can play the game and win and climb to diamond. But in order to climb past diamond, you need to be able to put a lot of these things together and start to play the game in the right way. For this reason, as a diamond player, the best way to improve is just to focus on improving on your weaknesses. If you are, for example, an Aurelia player that just constantly queues to every minion every time it's off cooldown with your Tiamat and you just shove the wave over and over again, then you should focus on freezing. Just work on freezing for 10 to 20 minutes and holding that freeze until you can do it forever, and then take that into a real game and freeze on the enemy opponent in order to build a lead instead of trying to all in them. If you ever want to get out of Diamond into Master and Grandmaster tier, you have to be a well-rounded player. Yes, there are some one tricks that just aren't well-rounded, but are so good at their one tricks that they can get into this tier, but it's much easier to just be a well-rounded player that understands their role at a high enough level that they can play the game close to properly and get to Master tier. You don't have to be perfect, but you at the very least should be able to adapt to almost any given scenario. This is the best way to be able to consistently win games in Diamond. If you struggle against one certain champion, then practice playing against that champion. If you can't beat Renekton or you can't beat Pantheon top lane, then find a Renekton player and ask if you can do lane matchups against them, or stop banning those champions so you can practice against them. A lot of players in this elo are used to winning, so they're not used to trying to improve anymore, and that's generally where the block happens here. In Master, Grandmaster, and Challenger tier, the best way to improve as a player is to get outside perspective on your play. Most of the time when a Grandmaster, Master, or Challenger player is getting stuck, it's either because they play something that just isn't good enough to get them to Challenger, which if you do that, then in that case, there's really not much you can do, or because they have some sort of approach to the game that might be fundamentally wrong, or there could be a better approach. Now, let me tell you, as a challenger player, it's really hard to challenge your own approach at the game, which is why it's really important to have discussions or to watch the replays of other challenger players to see what they do differently from you and some of the attitudes they have towards the game. For example, I might think that Riven is really broken, but I might only think this because I don't understand Riven's loss conditions. If I were to talk to a Riven 1 trick, they could then explain that to me and help me understand that better. As a Master Tier Plus player, it's very, very important that you don't be ignorant. You have to take other people's approaches to the game into account, especially the other players that are playing at a level higher or equal to you. Don't invalidate one specific player with a generic excuse because they might know something that you don't know. As a high-rated player, the best way you can improve is just to expose yourself to as much stuff as possible. Some of it won't be useful to you, but some of it might be a hidden gem. I want to share a very recent example of this that I personally had when talking with my younger brother, who's a very high-rated Echo 1 trick. Echo runs into a certain problem at level 7. When he gets a certain amount of AP and he uses his Q on the backline, it's going to bring those targets down to 1 HP. Even when combined with minion dematerializers, this is not enough to give you a full one-shot on the backline casters. This is a bit of a problem because you don't get an extra point in Q until level 9, so you just need a specific amount of AP in order to be able to one-shot the backline. For this reason, there's a strategy on Echo where you won't level up your Q at level 7 if you don't have enough AP. Instead, you'll just hold the point and wait until you can buy enough AP, or you'll put the point in your E instead, and then once you can base, buy more AP, the next level, you'll put that point in Q. Again, this is an example of something that even as a challenger player, you would never learn unless you talked to another challenger Echo player. By exposing yourself to more and more challenger players, having discussions with them, practicing playing against them, etc., and just interacting with them as much as possible, you expose yourself to as much game knowledge as possible, which will then give you a better chance of getting better and climbing the ladder. This is why in the past, other challenger players like Adrian and Dakar have come to me for advice on Renekton when the champion comes back into the meta, because they want to pick that champion up and they want to get an expert opinion. Likewise, if I wanted to get better at Riven or playing against Riven, I would just go to Adrian and chat with him about Riven for a while to try and understand the champion better. Players around you in this elo are not your biggest enemies, they're your biggest assets, and if you can befriend them and learn from them, that gives you a better chance of getting better. Now, this is something that can definitely apply to other elos as well, but it's usually not as useful because a lot of the time there's just better resources out there from better rated players. Now, that's all that I have for you for today's video on one tip to help you improve in any elo. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. Over there, we've got hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. Over there, we've got courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses. So if that is something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. As always, I'm Panther. I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.